Hi, welcome to the Woodshop Nerdery. In this video, I'm going to discuss the David Charlesworth ruler trick, which is a method involving a thin steel ruler like this for making the process of preparing plane irons easier and faster. But the internet being what it is, I've encountered some myths regarding the ruler trick, so let's investigate. Now in this video, I'm not going to show you how to do the ruler trick method. I'll leave that to David Charlesworth. He has an excellent video on YouTube and you should go watch that one. It's so much better to learn from the master rather than the student. I'll leave a link to his video in the description. Before preparing this plane iron, I studied his video again. The ruler trick, in my opinion, does not avoid flattening the back of a blade. It avoids polishing the entire back of the blade. And that's the primary misunderstanding. There is a difference between flattening and polishing. In order to explain that difference, let me call out a few key points from David Charlesworth's own video. I'll start with a quote from the video by David Charlesworth. I believe that the ruler trick, which I've advocated for many years, is pretty well known. However, I'm disheartened by the number of times that I see it misdescribed or shown badly. So it seems that even Mr. Charlesworth knew that there were some myths bubbling up about his ruler trick. Here are some important points about his video. He makes a point to show that he's removing an iron from a Lie Nelson rabbiting block plane. Lie Nelson makes premium products, and to my understanding, their irons come accurately pre-lapped from the factory, meaning the back of the blade's already flat. When using the ruler trick in the video, David uses what he calls a polishing stone. He describes it as a 10,000 grit ohishi. I was able to find what appears to be the same ohishi waterstone on Lie Nelson's website, and its width is listed at 3 inches, which is approximately 72 millimeters. The ruler is said to be a particular ruler that is 1/2 of a millimeter thick, and the angle of the metal being removed from the blade is described as 2/3 of a degree. Approximately 20 short strokes are specified for applying the polish using the ruler trick. He says the blade should go off the stone and then come onto the stone no more than 10 millimeters. And he also makes a point to compare his polishing stone to others' Strop and stropping compound. He says that his 10,000 grit polishing stone is probably finer than most people's stropping compound. This statement seems to be an answer to criticisms of the ruler trick that say you can't strop after using the ruler trick. I believe Mr. Charlesworth's point here is with a 10,000 grit waterstone, there's no need to use a strop. And finally, I'll note that David Charlesworth uses the word polish or polishing 14 times in the video. So in my opinion, I think it's clear that he describes his ruler trick as a polishing step, not a flattening step. If you watch the video, you can see that David Charlesworth is giving specific measurements, specific angles, specific types of waterstone, and specific types of plane irons. And when I encounter someone as intelligent and experienced as David Charlesworth, and I see that they're being that specific about something, I take their word for it. Since David Charlesworth provides us so many detailed measurements and angles in his video, I thought it'd be nice to represent that information as a diagram. In the top diagram, we're looking at a side view of the sharpening stone and the plane blade. This would represent the normal method of both flattening and polishing a plane iron. The 10,000 grit ohishi stone used by David Charlesworth in the video is 3 inches wide according to specification. That's approximately 76.2 millimeters. In the lower diagram, we're adding the side elevation of the steel ruler. It would be facing this orientation. That's a blue rectangle, and according to the content in the video, it's 1/2 a millimeter tall. We'll assume that it's about 10 millimeters wide, and as David Charlesworth says in the video, we're going to take strokes in this direction across the short width of the stone, but the tip of the blade coming no more than 10 millimeters away from the edge. So the distance between here and here is 2.21 inches or 56.2 millimeters. And with those measurements, we can do a little bit of trigonometry as well. Again, in the video, David Charlesworth says that the angle of the metal being removed in the polishing step is 2/3 of 1 degree. And since we know that A is 2/3 of a degree, then we also know that B must be 2/3 of a degree. With those two pieces of information, we can calculate the dimensions of this triangle. It's been a long time since I took a trigonometry class, so I just went to an online calculator and I placed in 2/3 of a degree for this angle, 0.5 millimeters for this height, and that gave me C, which is the distance between here and here. If I add the 10 millimeters to that value, I get 62.9 millimeters, or approximately 2.5 inches. So that does introduce somewhat of a mystery, because at 2/3 of a degree, we know that the stone width is approximately 2.5 inches, but we know that the stone in the video David Charlesworth is using is 3 inches wide. My guess is that at the time Mr. Charlesworth calculated this degree value, he may have been using a 2.5 inch water stone. Here's my old 2.5 inch water stone, or a 62 millimeter stone. That's a very common size. If I recalculate angle B using the 3 inch measurement, I get about 1/2 degree. However, if I change the width of the stone to one like this, which is a 2 inch wide stone, then the angle B would become almost 1 degree. I think the real point Mr. Charlesworth was trying to communicate is that the back bevel created by the ruler trick on a polishing stone is less than 1 degree, and therefore won't make very much difference in the way the plane performs. I can't replicate the David Charlesworth ruler trick as he describes in the video using a strop. He makes very clear towards the end of the video that in order to do the technique correctly, it must be done on a polishing stone. I'm not using a polishing stone, I'm using a strop. My strop is 3 inches wide, so at least it's the correct geometry. But let's pretend for a second that I would go ahead and try to do the ruler trick with the strop. I could put my ruler here, and the technique that David demonstrates is he pulls the blade onto the stone a few times to remove the burr, and then moves the blade back and forth. If you've ever used a strop, you know exactly what would happen if I tried that. The edge of this blade would simply shear the leather away. It would just cut it to pieces. For that reason, I don't think it will work. Now, when Rob Cosman demonstrates the David Charlesworth ruler trick, he moves his blades back and forth in this direction. Now the strop might last a little bit longer in that condition, but the edges of a plane iron and the corner here can be quite sharp. In fact, if I just even take a few strokes like this with the plane iron completely flat, I'll start to pick up material on the corner of that blade. And eventually that would just wear the leather to nothing. That's why when I address the back of the blade with the strop, I hang it off the edge and pull like this. Pick it up, pull, pick it up, pull. And I do that so that neither the bevel of the iron or the edges of the iron are ever working into the leather. Another point to make about the ruler trick video is that it's describing a polishing step, not a flattening step. The iron that David Charlesworth uses in the video comes from a Lie-Nielsen rabbiting block plane. Lie-Nielsen makes premium products, and it's my understanding that their blades are accurately lapped from the factory, so they're already flat. The ruler trick does not negate the need for flatness of the blade. It negates the need to polish a significant portion of the blade and focuses the polish only at the end. So the ruler trick would have not worked for this iron as it came new to me. When I got this iron new, I put it on one of my diamond stones, took a few strokes, and that revealed that there was a heavy high spot here and a heavy high spot here. Those high spots revealed that this blade was cupped from the factory, similar to the way this board is cupped. Hopefully you can see the band of light coming down there in the middle. And while the ruler trick may compensate for some degree of out of flatness on the back of a plane iron, it's clear to me that the plane iron must be reasonably flat because we're only removing a little bit of metal. I think I could demonstrate the impact of out of flat geometry of the plane iron in connection with the ruler trick. Instead of using the stone, ruler, and iron, I'll use this cupped board. I've stained the concave side, which would be equivalent to the back of my plane iron, so that when we wear away material, we'll be revealing the natural wood color, and it'll be very obvious where material is being removed and where it's not. Since I'm scaling up to this larger board, I'll scale the system up with a larger, thicker ruler, and we'll use this 6-inch wide fragment of a belt sander belt on this flat porcelain tile. To follow David's instructions, I'll put the plane iron, I'll draw it onto the sandpaper a few times, and then I'll move back and forth. And he specified approximately 20 strokes. I think you can already tell from the wood debris and the huge gap in the middle what you're going to see when I turn over this board. There you go. Did not touch the middle. So if I were polishing a blade that was cupped, I would only be polishing the edges. And that's one of the reasons why the plane iron has to be reasonably flat on the back. But there's another reason that I want a flat back on my plane irons, and that has to do with the cap iron fitment. Some people will call this a chip breaker. It's the same thing. When we fit a cap iron, we want no gap between the underside of the cap iron and the back side of the plane iron. If there is a gap, that gap will clog up with little bits of sawdust and shavings, and the plane will immediately clog up. You'll have to take the whole thing apart, clean it out, put it back together, and start all over again. And after a few shavings, it'll clog up again, and you'll have to start all over again. It is supremely frustrating to have any sort of gap. So that's another reason, apart from sharpening, that I want a flat back on my plane irons. To carry the analogy further, I'm going to go ahead and use the Rob Cosman technique and polish this board until I start wearing away stain here in the middle. I'll fast forward the video. This is going to take a while. Okay, there we go. Isn't it better just to go ahead and flatten the back of the plane iron on like a 250 grit water stone or something similar, rather than trying to polish away all this metal on a 10,000 grit polishing stone? I guess opinions may vary, but for me, I'm just going to go ahead, and if the back of the plane iron is not flat, I'm going to flatten it. Near the end of the demonstration, Mr. Charlesworth says something else that I think is important. I quote, "But what I want to say is that if you do the ruler trick correctly, if you do it on a fine polishing stone, such as an 8,000 or 10,000 grit Japanese water stone, you will get the most stunning results." So here's my take on Mr. Charlesworth's words about his own ruler trick. He is describing a method which avoids polishing large portions of the back of a plane iron. It's not a method to avoid flattening plane irons which have large cups or twists or other geometric distortions. Since only tiny bits of metal are being polished away at a very slight angle, logic tells us that the ruler trick can only tolerate small degrees of out of flatness. The iron must be flattened to a reasonable degree first before you can use the ruler trick successfully. And finally, the ruler trick will not work on a sharpening system like mine, where the final polishing stone is replaced with a strop. Well, that does it for this woodshop nerdery video. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.